Somewhere in the depths of the old pine forest was a place that the people of the nearest village called Dry Lake. There were no bodies of water there, just a perfectly round area of cracked earth, as if someone had scorched it with red-hot iron. The trees around the area were dead, their branches reaching for the sky like curled fingers. The locals avoided Dry Lake. Old-timers said the place was cursed. Some said that at night, strange sounds came from there, like someone whispering a name, but no one knew whose name it was. Ryan Smith, a young journalist at a city tabloid, had never believed in village tales. He specialized in mystery stories and loved debunking them. When he heard about Dry Lake, he thought it was just another story. A great opportunity to make money, Ryan thought as he grabbed his camera, recorder, and flashlight. He was accompanied by his friend Linda, a biology student. She was interested in studying the unexplained place scientifically. "It's probably just abnormal soil acidity," she said, loading test tubes and lab equipment into her backpack. They traveled to the lake in an old Jeep. As Ryan picked up the disc, he felt the surface begin to radiate a faint warmth. The symbols on it flashed with a soft golden light, and the words echoed in Ryan's head. "They're waiting." "Who are they?" Ryan muttered, but no one answered. At that moment Linda, noticing her friend's strange behavior, grabbed his arm. "Ryan, what are you doing?" "It's just some old piece of metal." But before he could answer, the ground around him began to shake. The rumbling intensified, and in the distance, shadows began to flicker among the dead trees. "We have to get out of here," Linda said, looking around. Instead of answering, Ryan looked at the disc again. The symbols on the disc had changed, and now they were forming new words. "The circle keeps them safe, but the circle is broken." "Ryan," Linda shouted, tugging on his shoulder. "Look!" Strange figures began to appear on the border of Dry Lake. Their outlines were barely recognizable, like shadows taking on flesh. Tall, with elongated limbs and disproportionately large heads, they looked like they were made of thick smoke. "Who is it?" Linda whispered, her voice trembling. The figures moved slowly toward them, leaving a plume of dark mist behind them. Ryan, still clutching the disc, felt it begin to vibrate in his hands, and the symbols flashed brighter. "They're awake," he said, his voice strangely detached. As the figures approached the center of Dry Lake, another form appeared between them, a clearer, almost human shape. It was a tall figure, clad in a long cloak that fluttered, though there was no wind. Her face was hidden by a hood, but from beneath it were eyes that glowed with an icy blue light. "Ryan, we're leaving. Now." Linda was in a panic. But it was as if Ryan hadn't heard her. He stared at the figure without taking his eyes off her. "Who are you?" he asked. The figure raised a hand, pointing to the disc he held. Her voice, low and echoing around the circle, echoed through their heads. "You have disturbed the peace. This circle was a barrier. Now you have become part of their game." Linda couldn't stand it and tried to knock the disc out of Ryan's hands, but barely had her fingers touched the surface when she was thrown aside by an invisible force. "Linda!" shouted Ryan, rushing towards her. The figure continued to speak. "It's too late. They have awakened, and now your time is running out. Then everything disappeared. The figures dissolved, the humming stopped, and the disk became cold and still. Linda struggled to her feet, her face pale. "What was that?" she asked, barely breathing. Ryan looked at the disk. The symbols were no longer glowing, but he knew it was just beginning. The next morning, Ryan and Linda decided to head back to Dry Lake to try to figure out what had happened. They took with them all the equipment they needed and books on symbolism that Linda had managed to find at the town library. They reached the lake as the sun was just rising. The morning light made the dead zone even more ominous. Linda immediately began studying the ground while Ryan pulled out the disk again. "There must be some clues here," Linda said as she laid out the books and notes. "These symbols could be part of an ancient ritual." Ryan noticed that there were traces of the strange figures they had seen at night around the lake. "Look," he said, pointing to the ground. "These footprints are not human." Linda lifted her head. The footprints did indeed look like long, deep prints left by clawed feet. Linda soon found a description in one of the books that matched the symbols on the disk. It was part of an ancient ritual. Apparently, this circle was created to hold something inside. To restore the barrier, we need a ritual. "And what would it take?" Ryan asked. "Water. Lots of water." They began pouring water from the jerry cans onto the ground around the lake, and gradually the symbols on the disk began to glow again. As soon as they closed the circle, however, the shadows appeared again. The figures moved faster, as if they were trying to interfere. But now Ryan and Linda were ready. The ritual ended when Linda recited the ancient words from the book. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the figures disappeared as suddenly as they had appeared. When it was over, the disk turned completely black and the dry lake turned into an ordinary clearing. "Did we make it?" Ryan asked. "I hope so," Linda answered. But somewhere in the distance, a low rumbling sound was heard again. Several weeks had passed since the events at Dry Lake. Ryan and Linda returned to town, determined not to discuss what had happened again. But the feeling of uneasiness persisted. One night, as Ryan was editing material for his article, his computer suddenly froze. The screen rippled, and then familiar symbols appeared on it. They were the same signs he'd seen on the disk. "You have not completed. The barrier is unstable," it appeared on the screen. Ryan turned pale. He rushed to call Linda, but her phone wasn't answering. "No, not again," he muttered, quickly packing. When he arrived at Linda's apartment, the door to her apartment was ajar. Inside everything looked normal, but under the desk he found her phone blinking red. The screen displayed a strange map with a dot pulsing somewhere in the woods. "Did you go there again, Linda?" Ryan whispered. Without thinking, he got in his car and headed back toward Dry Lake. When Ryan reached the lake, he noticed that its center had changed. There was now a deep depression with a faint bluish glow emanating from it. Linda stood at the edge, as if mesmerized by this light. "Linda! What are you doing?" Ryan shouted, running up to her. She turned to him, but her eyes were as blank as a doll's. "They want to take us home, Ryan," she said in a strange voice. "We have disturbed their peace, and now we must pay." The figures they had seen before began to rise from the cave-in. They were no longer smoky shadows. Now they were tall creatures with smooth silver skin, huge black eyes, and long fingers. "You're the key, Ryan," one of them said, holding out his hand. "The key to what?" Ryan asked, backing away. "The fix. You opened us up. Now you have to close us." Linda, still in a trance, started to move toward the hole. Ryan grabbed her arm, trying to stop her, but the creature quickly moved closer and grabbed his shoulder. "You have to choose, it's either you or her," it said. Ryan felt his body go rigid. He remembered the words on the disc, "You awakened them." Realized it was all his fault. "Okay. I'll go," he said, letting go of Linda's hand. The creature nodded, and the figures began to retreat, drawing Ryan toward the light. At the last moment, Linda woke up and screamed. "No! It's not your fault." But Ryan had already disappeared into the blue light, and the gap closed. After those events, Dry Lake became a normal place. The trees began to grow, and the ground was no longer cracked. Linda searched for a long time for ways to bring Ryan back, but all her attempts were in vain. However, every night when she looked up at the stars, she thought one of them was blinking more often than the others. And she believed it was Ryan, giving her a sign that he was out there somewhere in the distance, watching her. Dry Lake remained a mystery, and the locals now simply called it Memory Circle.